Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I think that a lot of Michigan fans, and myself included, right, leading up to that game, you're so hyped. For a lot of Michigan fans out there, I think this was me, and I can speak for them. It was trying to convince yourself that Michigan could beat Georgia, right? And you're trying to say, all right, here's how we could do it. This game plan, this game plan. Their offense isn't really that good. Blah blah blah. Well, it just ended up that they were bigger, faster, stronger, and that was really all they needed to do. And so, with that being said, I still look at it as a super, super positive outlook for Michigan season. I think anybody saying anything different is ridiculous, to be honest. Probably the best Michigan season this decade. 2004 maybe could have been it with a Rose Bowl victory. 2003 into 2004. But other than that, I mean, there aren't many good seasons like this where you beat Ohio State and win a Big Ten title.
There you go. Beat Ohio State, win a Big Ten championship. That hasn't been done since 2011, 2004. Added up, it's not difficult to come out with a positive result in that. The Georgia situation. So, I was attempting to, of course, evaluate, analyze, and then, come up with my prediction, which ended up being Michigan 27-24, even though yes. Although if you listen to my prediction video, it was almost as if everything I stated up to the conclusion was, Mark, you just told us all the reasons why Georgia's going to win this game, and then you're going to pick. Because I said if these two teams met 100 times, Georgia wins about 70 times, and I check off a ton of boxes on Georgia's side and very few on Michigan's. I went through the whole thing, and that I even threw out like a crazy, like if somebody would tell me today this is going to be 45-14, I'd say, well, Georgia won. That there was all this on Georgia's side, but still I didn't think there was as much difference between the two teams, number one. And number two, the better team doesn't always win. And I just thought it was Michigan was playing together and steamrolling and momentum and everything. And Georgia, who knows where they were going into kickoff psychologically. So we got our answer. Okay. And I even went to the point, Justin, that I was on Michigan podcast the other day, and I thought, I want to reacquaint myself with what I saw 4 or 5 days ago. And so I watched the first half because I was trying to gauge, I'm going to look at every play, and after the play kind of determine, was that a talent thing or was that a scheme thing? And most of them I thought were talent issues, speed, size, athleticism. There were some times where, Cade McNamara threw it a little wide and Eric All could have possibly caught it. That would have converted a third down. Obviously, Georgia had nothing to do with that play except for being in the vicinity. That's a quarterback and a tight end misconnecting, not connecting on a third. And, then who knows what happens in the rest of the drive. So you have those unforced errors. But, where was your assessment in regards to coaching and scheme versus talent versus maybe it was just a bad night?
I think it ended up being a little bit of all of that, but I think first and foremost, it was talent. It was just that it was Georgia being super fast and super strong. And the one time when I realized that was when Blake Corum tried to get to the edge and their linebacker beat him there. I don't think Blake Corum got beat to the edge one time before that all season. I mean, he's one of the fastest backs in the country. And it's just a different type of speed when you have a linebacker that's able to match up with a Blake Corum like that. And so when Michigan wasn't able to get to the edge, obviously they weren't getting the run game going up the middle either. Then all of a sudden it was like, all right, I don't know what they do. So for me, I don't think Josh Gaddis called a great game or had a great game plan, but I also think a lot of it could have worked but Georgia just blew it all up. And it wasn't just that they had a better scheme. It was just, even on the play that you're talking about with Cade McNamara to Eric All, I think Cade McNamara was off a step every single play because he hadn't gotten that kind of pressure on him all year, right? So when you're having that big of guys come up the middle and get pressure on both offense, defense, everywhere, really, then the game plan, it might look great on paper, it might be great, but if you have better guys playing against you, then it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, and then I tried to add up the whole Big Ten SEC narrative, and there were other games played between the conferences, and what does that mean? And I have somewhat come to the conclusion, and I think that's complex. I think we can go all different routes because, as we talked about with talent, if you believe in the 247 Sports team rankings, then Michigan showed up with the 15th most talented team in the country, and Georgia showed up with the second most talented team in the country. But Ohio State's got the third most talented team in the country, and obviously Michigan won that game convincingly. And there are different matchups involved and so forth. But I kind of come to the conclusion that the Big Ten is a strong conference. It's the second best conference in the nation. I think the SEC is stronger, but I think those two teams that we're going to see on Monday night are just, they've separated themselves. And I think maybe Ohio State in some ways they are technically as talented, but I don't think there's any question after watching the games that this Ohio State edition wouldn't match up quite. It would be an interesting matchup to see. Of course, we'd like to see a lot of different matchups out there that we won't, but yeah, I think Michigan would play a better game maybe if they saw them round 2 and be like, okay, the shock's worn off.
Yeah.
We can see them again. We can get used to this speed, because speed, and you there are ways to camouflage it and make up for it, especially when you've got NFL type speed yourself. Shoot, Northwestern does it against better teams in the Big Ten, faster and more talented teams all the time, and get away with it. So there are ways to do it. But I'm watching this game again, and even the replay scratching my head, because I'm thinking Georgia's going to produce more NFL players off this roster, but not that many.
Yeah, and I think that, when we're talking about even going back to that whole Big Ten versus SEC thing too, I tried to say it like this on our last podcast, where do I think that Michigan is on Alabama or Georgia's level? No, I don't think they're close quite yet. They don't have the recruiting. They don't have the talent. Do I think that Michigan could match up and be competitive or beat the rest of the SEC? Yes, I absolutely do think that. So I think it's not a Big Ten versus SEC. I think it's the top 2 teams of each conference right now are so far ahead of the rest of them, and the SEC specifically is really to that point, So that's where I'm at in terms of Big Ten versus SEC. And then in terms of Michigan, talent, speed, NFL, all that stuff, I think you want to say, oh, act like you've been there before. They've never been there before. Michigan's never been there before. There definitely is a shock factor there. There's a lights go on. All of a sudden, you've been playing Big Ten teams, even Ohio State. Let's think about this offensive line for Michigan was phenomenal all year. They didn't play. Wisconsin's defensive line was pretty solid. Penn State's was pretty solid. Honestly, Ohio State's defensive line was one of the worst that they've had in quite some time. So when you go from that to this Georgia defensive line that is unbelievable, this is one of the best. I kept trying to talk to people and say, you have to go look at the stats that Georgia put up on defense this year and not just look at the Alabama game. Because if you look at the Alabama game, it's so much different than every other game on their schedule. My God, the games they played against the rest of the schedule was just unbelievable. Nobody can move the ball even a little bit on them. So I think it just does still come back down to that talent. And then, for Michigan, that shock factor where, when Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo can't get to the quarterback every time, well, now the secondary is doing stuff that they haven't done all year. When Michigan can't run the ball and their offensive line's not getting a push, all of a sudden you're Josh Gaddison, you're saying, well, shit, that was our entire game plan. Now what do we do? So I think it's shock factor all around. For nobody likes it when things don't go well. And I don't think Michigan, honestly, I don't think that they did a great job all year of having a plan B. Even Mike McDonald in this game, I was so frustrated at, once again, Michigan being late onto the field in terms of substitutions when Georgia would rotate or do a motion, Michigan couldn't figure it out. We saw that in Michigan's only loss prior to this game against Michigan State, and that was a huge issue in that game. I was a little disappointed in both coaches, Josh Gaddis and Mike McDonald. So I think game scheme, did have a factor, but ultimately, like you said, I think it's going to be, well, I'd love to we could go down the roster at some point here and take a look who's going to the NFL for Michigan versus Georgia too.